the cloud. Okay. It should be recording,
Yeah.
and then we can start this. All right. So today's topic is diversity and inclusion. If you haven't signed in yet, then you can go through the QR code, sign in. And if you sign up as a member of ACM or ACM-W, you can sign up. All right, so before we get into it, see here are a few of our upcoming events. We have a game night tomorrow. That's at 8 o'clock. Next we have a technical collaboration with Steve on Friday from 5 to 7. All right, so we're going to start out, before going into inclusion, we're going to start out by focusing on diversity and stuff.
Yeah, did you move your mic, Indira? You're cutting out a bit.
Oh, I'm cutting out?
Just a kind of in and out.
Okay. My mic is
better now.
Okay, better now. Okay, I just moved closer. All right. I think Annabelle, this is yourself.
All right. So a history of diversity tech is women were actually the first computers. Like their job title was computer, as in one who computes. Because back in the early days, before real electronic computers, they just had women doing tons of math by hand. It was kind of menial work, like mental menial work. But, and fun fact, Betty Snyder, she worked on the ENIAC machine. ENIAC was one of like the first computers during like the 40s. But yeah, she invented the concept of the breakpoint, where you put a stop at one point in your program to make sure everything up until that point worked, so you can help narrow down where exactly your problem is. Yeah, so part of the reason that in the beginning it was mostly actually women in computer programming is hardware was like where it was at. That was like for the guys, that was the cool stuff. Software didn't even really like exist for a while, you know, because I mean, first there was only hardware and then software was created, so I didn't really have any preconceived gender notions about it because it was brand new. But in the beginning, a lot of companies actually preferred women for it because they thought, well, programming is, you know, methodical. You have to be very concise and follow directions. So they compared it to like knitting, or if you like cooking from a cookbook, like you might be good at programming. And I mean, I personally like both crocheting and baking, so they're not entirely wrong that those two things are similar to programming. So that's part of why they sought out women for those jobs. But as programming became more important, people realized, hey, software actually is pretty cool and you can do tons of stuff with it. Less and less women started to do it. And I have here software engineer versus programmer, because that title is actually kind of important. Engineering is like a man's field. So at first, when it was just a programmer, that's kind of implies like a menial thing. They're just doing like menial tasks. We all know that programming can involve a decent amount of grunt work sometimes, just simple work, but it takes a while to like code it all in. So then they started calling it software engineering, which is more like higher status in engineering is for men. But also, not so fun fact is that literally as more women enter a field, the pay for it goes down. So I mean by where a woman works, when you gets valued, like this has happened in fields like biology and even jobs with like similar functions. Like janitors and housekeepers do similar functions, but janitors are mostly men, housekeepers mostly women, housekeepers make less. So it's not just that women choose to do lower paid jobs like some people talk about, it's literally that whatever women do isn't seen as important, so it gets paid less. But yeah, so the amount of women in computing was actually fairly constant or on the rise up until the 1980s when personal computers came into it. And that was because parents were more likely to get personal computers for their sons or put it in their son's room and encourage him to do that. And also that some video games came about, which were heavily targeted toward boys. So, you know, like video games, you might want to try and play with this computer. And then when people got to college, some people had experience with programming, boys and girls mostly didn't. which can make you second guess yourself. They're like, oh, all these guys already know so much about programming and I don't know anything. Can I really do this? Which I know even I, like, who had programming experience in high school, was a little intimidated by people who seem to have so much more programming experience than me as a freshman. There was also this thing called the capacity crisis, sort of. That's not officially called that, but so many more students were trying to enter computer science that universities had to restrict who could get in. And so they did it by who had experience with programming already. So since men were more likely to have experience, women just weren't even let into those programs a lot because they didn't have any background in it. They also just put culture fit at the bottom because that's kind of like one of those vague terms that companies and hiring managers can use to subtly discriminate against women. Be like, oh, she wouldn't fit into our culture, and that culture is like really bro-y and masculine, even though like they're perfectly qualified for the job. So yes, sort of how programming went from being mostly women to what we have today, where we're a minority. Yeah, fun facts.
All right, so the first issue that we're going to talk about or present is specific to gender disparities in tech. And when we talk about gender, we definitely want to emphasize like the spectrum. So that definitely includes like non-binary and also like LGBTQ, like people that identify in LGBTQ. And actually, before I go into women in tech or women in CS, when I looked into data on LGBTQ in tech, it was actually pretty hard to find like concrete data on the representation of LGBTQ in tech. And I actually found out that it's actually a pretty big problem right now, the way companies are gathering data on tech workers that do identify as LGBTQ. So I thought that was also pretty interesting and also something that definitely needs to be addressed moving forward. But in regards to women in CS, I definitely always found this data very surprising and glaring. It's so the graph on the right shows it best. From 1970 to 1985, you see that growth in the number of women achieving bachelor's degrees in computer science, and then from 1985, you see it like gradually decrease up until now. And so it definitely goes to like tell us or show us how we've decided to progress as a society. There's definitely some big issues there. But yeah, that's it for gender disparities in tech. And then
I just want to add, the 80s was when like a bunch of movies started popularizing like the nerd geek thing, and they were always portraying dudes as in that nerd geek who was sitting in his room alone, just coding all hours of the night. And something that I think is important for all of us to remember as this is internship season, that research shows that in order to apply for a job, women feel the need to meet 100% of the criteria, while men usually apply after meeting 60%. So one thing I've heard that is like if you actually meet all the criteria for a job posted, you're probably overqualified. So yeah, even if you don't meet all the qualifications, as long as you meet over half, like don't be afraid to apply for that. Because, you know, sometimes those job requirements are more like a wish list. Like, sure, we want a candidate to have all these things, but I mean, not everyone knows everything. So you can always learn on the job.
Yeah. All right. The next issue we also definitely want to address are racial disparities in tech. And this graph is from 2015, our data collected from 2015, and it definitely shows you like the differences that definitely need to be addressed moving forward. Like 50% of tech workers in the tech industry are white, 41% are Asian, 3% are Hispanic, 2% are Black, and 4% are multi or others. And here we also want to emphasize that the need to further focus on combining racial and gender disparities, because there are definitely some issues to address and think about there, like what companies need to do, basically going into the realm of intersectionality. So some data on that. So computer science research jobs will grow 19% by 2026, but women of color make up less than 10% of all bachelor's degrees earned in computing. So there's definitely some issues and strides to make there. On to consequences of these disparities. First, we'll give the example of Amazon's resume recruiting tool. So back in 2015, Amazon had this tool that rated resumes from 1 to 5 stars based on an AI algorithm. The problem was, or they soon discovered that this tool was not rating candidates in a gender neutral way. And that was because the data set that Amazon used to train this tool was composed of 10 years of resumes that they received. But the problem was that all these resumes came from men. So what resulted is that tool, it would decrement stars from a candidate if they use the word woman or like women's tech club in the resume. It even actually cut stars from graduates that went to all women's schools. So there's definitely an issue there. Like on the topic of AI bias, there's the example of Uber's facial recognition technology. And the problem here was for Uber employees, that just Uber drivers, to sign into their employee account, they had to use facial recognition technology to sign in. The problem came up when, specifically for transgender Uber drivers that were going through the process of gender change, and eventually the facial recognition technology wasn't able to recognize them. And as a result, they would lose employment from people that wanted Uber drivers. So it definitely makes you think about like why we're using certain technologies to address certain problems. And because Uber could have easily just used fingerprint recognition or just your basic sign in. But yeah, it's definitely things to think about. And I think Meredith Walker, co-author of AI Now, put it really well when she said, we need to look beyond technical fixes. We need to ask who has the power, who is harmed, who benefits, and ultimately who gets to decide how these tools are built and which purposes they serve. And finally, we're ending diversity, the topic of diversity, with the benefits of it. So clearly, or it's been shown that when you have diverse groups of people, you're more likely to create technology that is representative of the users, that benefits a wider range of your users. And financially, racial and ethnic diversity initiatives in companies, or that focus on racial and ethnic diversities initiatives, are 35% more likely to have financial returns above national industry means. And then when you combine gender and ethnic diversity, then you're 25% more likely to have financial returns above national industry means. So that finishes on the topic of diversity, and now we move on to Amelia with inclusion.
Okay, hi. So we touched on diversity, and it usually goes hand in hand with inclusion, but because they are very related, but it's important that they both get their own attention as well as being connected. So, we talked about gender and racial diversity, but it's also important to consider other ways like age, because they have life experience and also just different life experiences to begin with, like different backgrounds, whether it be like economic or where they live. You can learn something new from anybody in the world, and it's very important to keep that in mind when coming up with a team or putting people in a group that you want to work with. And when it comes to inclusion, it's super important to keep in mind that once you have your group of people together, you want everyone to feel like their voice can be heard and like they are part of that group. And making sure that there are things in place for them to be able to talk and be comfortable. I was going to say that in tech, we all work super hard to get that internship or get that job, and everyone wants their voice to be heard. And it might be a little easy to get caught up in that and maybe like step over someone, but you have to keep in mind that everyone worked hard to get there, and we should all try to work together and make sure that it's like a cohesive group. And you'll have your time to shine, of course, but it'll be better that way if everyone gets their time. And here's another quote that goes with that. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. So it's more like personalized. You get there, but then you actually get that invite.
All right, so now we've reached the point of the activity session, and our activity here is from the given settings, which is either college or workplace, identify scenarios in which a certain group may become marginalized. And then once you identify those scenarios, suggest ways to create an inclusive environment in which these groups can feel like they belong. And also when we talk about workplace, we also want to emphasize you can use like internships or even research labs. But yeah. So we're gonna go into breakout rooms and let's see. I'll start these breakout rooms. All right. So everyone's gonna go into breakout rooms. Let's go with. Okay, everyone has 3. And then, okay, I'm gonna open all rooms and then I'm gonna put in the chat just this activity and a possible icebreaker that you guys can start out. And you guys can go into your breakout rooms and then chat. Okay.
Just us. I guess. Let me see. What kind of stuff do you stream?
I mainly stream video games. This past quarantine, I have been I've been thrusted into the world of competitive esports. So I played a MOBA called Smite, and you play as gods and goddesses from different mythologies. Competitively, so I basically streamed my competitive games. I streamed different FPSs like Doom Eternal. And lately, I've just been like kind of preoccupied with school. But when I do stream, it's Dead by Daylight with my friends, or something else. Yeah.
Just curious.
How was it?
It was good. We like we came back like probably a minute before Indira said like a minute left. So
Nice.
All right. All right, I guess now that we're back and everyone had like their little discussions, I don't know if anyone wants to share some of the scenarios that they came up with and the solutions to those scenarios. I can share what our group came up with. So there was one for at least college when you're in like a group or teams and you're put in a group with like, let's say, where you're the only woman in that group, and maybe there's just no communication between the teacher and the group about like how well you're working together or when you feel like you're being isolated. So really, one solution that we came up with, or they came up with, was to just have teachers go through more training that help address like team issues. Another one was when like in an environment where you do feel like you're not being included, then you could put up flyers around the school that kind of just attract more people that can join in that environment. So because that specific environment was so just like homogeneous. And then for one that I came up with was whenever like I apply to internships that advocate like we're looking for minorities, or we're definitely putting emphasis on minorities or underrepresented groups. I find it interesting that even though like I am able to attain a position in a company or a research group that is focusing on that, when I'm actually in those groups, I don't feel like they've actually practiced those mindsets very well. And I think workshops or just at least discussions could definitely be made in those scenarios to help actually groups work better and involve everyone.
Me and Alex talked a little bit about how like disability and tech interact, because there are like so many ways technology can make the world more accessible and just more livable and for disabled people. But if there aren't disabled people in technology to like bring up these issues and be like, hey, this app won't work for me because of this, and they're out there to bring those up issues, and those people just get excluded. You know, it could open so many doors for them. Sometimes literally.
Mm. All right. Yeah, if no one else has any scenarios that they want to share, then this is pretty much like the last or nearing the end of the workshop, and just like some final notes or ideas to leave with, like to instill a culture of belonging. So when you're in a group or just a workplace company, when you're introducing someone, make sure to introduce them as a whole person beyond their roles and responsibilities, because where they came from and has value and can definitely have value in the technological creations that you guys are doing. And then ask people how they feel and generally listen to what they're saying. Solicit input in meetings, so ask people what they think, especially if you're going back and forth with just one other person and excluding the other one, make sure to stop and ask them what they think. Delegate tasks in a way that demonstrates trust, pay attention during meetings and avoid distractions, and then share your stories and encourage others to share their own. And hopefully through that, we can just create more of an inclusive environment. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this workshop. Thank you everyone for coming and participating. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. But the link tree to all of our socials are in this QR code. But yeah, that's it.
You can stop recording, I think.
Okay. Let's see.